everyone, so here's a question that probably crosses your mind. Every time you're at a family gathering and someone says, "Oh, we just have the fat gene," right before reaching for seconds. Is obesity actually genetic, or is it all about what we eat and how we live? The answer is going to surprise you, because it's both more complicated and more hopeful than you might think. Let me start with a number that might shock you. In 1980, about 5% of men and 8% of women worldwide were obese. By 2008, those rates jumped to nearly 10% for men and 14% for women. That's literally doubling in less than 30 years. Now here's the thing, our genes didn't suddenly change in 30 years. The human genome doesn't evolve that quickly, so clearly something environmental is happening here. But before we write off genetics entirely, let me share something equally fascinating from twin studies. When researchers studied identical twins who were raised apart in completely different environments, they found correlation coefficients of 0.7 for men and 0.66 for women in their body mass indexes. That's incredibly high. It means that even when twins grew up in different homes, eating different foods, living different lives, their body weights were still remarkably similar. So which is it? Are we slaves to our DNA or victims of our environment? Number 1. The genetic side of the story. Let's start with what we know about genetics. Twin studies show that body mass index heritability estimates range from 31 to 90%. That's a huge range, and we'll come back to why that matters. Even in children growing up during the obesity epidemic, studies confirmed substantial heritability for BMI and waist circumference at 77% for both measures. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists have identified over 500 genetic locations associated with obesity. The first one discovered was called FTO, and it's still one of the most studied. But here's the catch, these 68 known genetic variants explain only a small proportion of genetic variance in body mass index. For example, 2 common variants in FTO and MC4R account for less than 2% of the variance in adult BMI. Think about that for a second. We know obesity is highly heritable, but the specific genes we've found only explain a tiny fraction of that heritability. It's like knowing that musical talent runs in families, but not being able to identify which specific genes make someone a great pianist. The genetic influence is clearly there, but it's incredibly complex and involves hundreds or thousands of genetic variants working together. Number 2. The environment's explosive impact. Now let's talk about the environment, because this is where the story gets wild. Although obesity was more prevalent in most countries after 1960, compared to preceding decades, there was an exponential increase in both adult and childhood obesity rates in the early 1980s. This epidemic rise was paralleled by sharp increases in the caloric density of foods and the consumption of fats and refined carbohydrates. Something fundamentally changed in our food environment in the 80s. Suddenly, cheap, calorie-dense, highly palatable food became available everywhere. Portion sizes exploded. Physical jobs became desk jobs. We started driving instead of walking. The environment shifted from one where you had to work to get calories to one where you have to actively work to avoid them. And here's the kicker, more than 1 billion people in the world are now living with obesity. Nearly 880 million adults and 159 million children and adolescents, aged 5 to 19 years. This happened in the span of just a few decades. Our genes didn't change, our environment did. Number 3. The plot twist, they work together. So here's where it gets really fascinating, and this is the part that gives me hope. Genetics and environment don't just add to each other, they multiply. They interact. And understanding this interaction changes everything. Twin studies have shown that a high level of physical activity can substantially reduce the influence of genetic factors on BMI in both young and older adults. One study of 47,000 adult runners showed that vigorous physical activity decreased the parental contribution to BMI by 48 to 58%. Let me repeat that because it's huge. Exercise cut the genetic influence on body weight roughly in half. Your genes aren't your destiny. They're more like a volume knob, and your lifestyle choices can turn that volume way down. Recent research from 2024 looked at over 300,000 people and calculated their genetic risk scores for obesity. They found significant interaction between high genetic risk and poor lifestyles. Adherence to a healthy lifestyle was associated with a reduced risk of obesity and obesity-related conditions across all genetic backgrounds. Think about it this way. Imagine two people, both with high genetic risk for obesity. One lives a sedentary lifestyle, eats a lot of processed foods, doesn't get enough sleep. The other exercises regularly, eats mostly whole foods, manages stress, sleeps well. The difference in their outcomes can be dramatic, even though they started with the same genetic hand. Number 4. Why the environment amplifies genetic risk. Here's something that sounds counterintuitive, but is backed by solid research. The proportion of variability in BMI attributable to genetic variation is actually increased among people born after the establishment of a modern obesogenic environment. Wait, what? Think of it like this. If everyone lived in an environment where food was scarce, and you had to hunt or gather everything you ate, genetic differences in metabolism wouldn't matter much. Everyone would be lean. But in an environment where there's a McDonald's on every corner, and you can have 5,000 calories delivered to your door in 30 minutes, suddenly, those genetic differences in appetite control, metabolism, and fat storage become really important. The obesogenic environment doesn't affect everyone equally. It hits people with genetic susceptibility much harder. It's like having a genetic predisposition to alcohol addiction. In a world without alcohol, that genetic predisposition doesn't matter. But in a world where alcohol is everywhere, easily accessible, and heavily marketed, those genes can become very consequential. Number 5. What this means for you. So let's bring this all together with some practical implications. If you have a family history of obesity, yes, you probably have some genetic variants that make weight management more challenging. But here's the empowering part. Those variants are not a life sentence. Findings indicate that behavioral changes such as improving diet and physical activity can substantially offset obesogenic effects of risk alleles, which has broader clinical and public health implications. Research from 2024 showed that individuals at high genetic risk of obesity needed higher daily step counts to reduce the risk of obesity than those at moderate or low genetic risk, suggesting that individualized physical activity recommendations that incorporate genetic background may reduce obesity risk. What this means is that if you're genetically predisposed to obesity, you might need to be more vigilant than someone without that predispositions. You might need to move more, be more mindful about food choices, prioritize sleep more consistently. It's not fair, but it's reality. The good news is that it absolutely works. Number 6. The bigger picture. Here's what I think is the most important takeaway from all this research. The obesity epidemic is environmental full stop. The sharp increases in obesity prevalence occurred in the early 1980s. Paralleling sharp increases in the caloric density of foods, we created an environment that makes it incredibly easy to gain weight and incredibly hard to lose it. But who becomes obese in this environment is largely genetic. Some people can navigate the modern food environment relatively easily. Others struggle constantly. That variation is mostly genetic. It's not about willpower or character or discipline. It's about biology interacting with environment. We're entering an era where you might be able to get your genetic risk score for obesity and use that information to personalize your approach to health. Some companies already offer this. The science isn't quite there yet for precise recommendations, but it's getting closer. The key insight from all the research is this: genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. Or to put it more hopefully, genetics might make the game harder, but it doesn't determine the outcome. You're playing the hand you're dealt, but you absolutely have agency in how you play it. So is obesity genetic or environmental? It's both. It's genetic susceptibility meeting environmental opportunity. It's genes and lifestyle dancing together in a complex interaction that varies from person to person. And the most important part? Understanding this interaction gives us power to intervene effectively, whether at the individual level through lifestyle choices, or at the societal level through policy changes that make healthy choices easier for everyone. If you found this helpful, give it a like and subscribe for more science-based health content. Drop a comment below and let me know, has understanding the genetics made you think differently about obesity? Let's talk about it.